Uh,
Okay, Boker Tov, everybody. How are you doing today?
okay.
Could you hear me?
Baruch Hashem, yes, thank you, Rabbi. How are you?
Good. Baruch Hashem Leka. Good to see you all. Hope you all had an enjoyable and pleasant Women's Day yesterday.
Baruch
And,
Hashem.
and today, I am
That's all like
privileged to
this.
be elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, he's
So
obviously
just
talking.
to
Let's
give
just put a
you a
picture up.
little
Yeah, I'll
taste of
just type
today's.
Apple. It's perfect.
Somebody's talking.
Okay, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to mute you all. This way, we don't have
Yeah.
any distraction or
Yeah, very
disturbance. If
good.
everybody could just keep that in mind, that we are broadcasting on
Keep.
Facebook and YouTube, and if you're doing anything else, we're just on a broadcast, so everybody could, everyone hears all the noise, all the background. All right, ladies and gents, today we are going to talk about, let's first start with the Parsha, and then I'll get to the Shofar. Shofar so good, right? And we'll discuss some fascinating ideas and insights in this week's Parsha. Let's start off with just a little review of the Parsha. Hold on, it looks like the backgrounds are getting in the way. So let's give it a second. Let's make it no virtual background. Is this better? Yeah, can everyone see? All right, good. So with that in mind, let's look. This week's portion is Shoftim, a quick review of the Parsha, and then straight into some insights on some lessons from the Parsha, which, as you can see on the screen, what we decided to discuss today is how to control our feelings, maybe even with laser precision. And I chose to put inspiration here from the wild. I'm with my kids in the bush for a couple of days, and so you drive here in the wild, in the bush, and you wonder how to keep control. You have wilde chayas around, right? So we'll discuss that with some lessons on the parsha. But first, let's just delve straight into the parsha itself. Take some lessons, some ideas, and apply them to life as we want to discuss. So the parsha Shoftim starts off with Moshe Rabbeinu. He's continuing his end of life, his farewell address to the Jewish people. And he instructs the people, the Bnei Yisrael, to appoint judges. Shoftim v'shotrim titan lecha b'chol sharecha. He says, judges and officers you should have in all your gateways. And it's important, every single city has the people who enforce the laws. And he continued with the very famous words, tzedek, tzedek tirdav, justice shall you pursue. He tells them that they have to make sure that justice is properly pursued without corruption and all the other issues that we're familiar with, without favoritism. Crimes have to be investigated, have to be properly, thoroughly examined, and talk about two minimum witnesses, the credibility of the witnesses, kosher witnesses, in order to convict or punish somebody. And Moshe continues, in every generation, he says, there will be those who are entrusted with the task of interpreting the laws. Maybe we could talk about this more tomorrow, of applying the laws of the Torah to life. And we have to understand the difference between rabbinic law and biblical law, so maybe that will be tomorrow's shiur. But he tells them that according to the law, al-pi, that they asher yerucha, that they will teach you, the judgments that they will instruct you. That's what should be done. We have to follow the law. Of course, we're talking about Torah law, but we have to understand in general. Lester or Mervyn last week, I don't remember which one of you asked, that Pirkei Avot and Ethics of Our Fathers, we discussed the idea that we pray for the welfare of the country, regardless of its corruption and issues that we know that it certainly has, and which country doesn't have, because we know that if we didn't have the country's laws, then there would be anarchy. So we are clear here about that instruction. And in fact, the Torah says, here we have this verse which I elucidated on a week or two ago, that you shouldn't veer to the right or to the left, yamin and small. The concept, the idea that, don't digress, don't add to the Torah, don't detract from the Torah. And that's emphasized in this week's parsha. Last week was explicitly saying don't add and don't detract, but in this week's parsha it says don't turn to the right and don't turn to the left. If you recall, a beautiful, fascinating insight from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, the father of the Rebbe, where he discussed this idea and said that if you look at the first letter of the Torah and the last letter of the Torah, you get the entire encompassing of the entire Torah, which the first letter is a Beis and the last letter is a Lamed. And the verse here is saying don't turn to the right or to the left. If you turn to the right of the Beis and the Lamed, what word do you get? To the right of it, we're getting the word Ach, and to the left, we're getting the word Gam. So it's another time the Torah is instructing us, don't add, don't subtract. Both are important aspects in order for us to follow the Torah properly. And so there's lots of other insights in the Parsha as we'll go through it over the week. It includes the prohibition against idolatry and sorcery, which we also had last week's Parsha. So it's sort of the portions are connected. And the idea, of course, this is Moshe's farewell address, and it's all being packed together. And he's repeating some of the ideas. And we have the laws of appointing a king and the laws of the behavior of a king, that the king is not allowed to have too many wives or horses, etc. And, good old joke, they say, because in Jewish law, polygamy is allowed. If you think about it, throughout our history, there were always more women than men. So I guess it was a simple solution, because we go all the way back to Egypt. This is, again, my own hypothesis. This is not necessarily the case. My hypothesis is that if you go in our history, back in Egypt, there were the boys were instructed, right? There was the law of Pharaoh to annihilate, to kill the boys. They had to be cast into the river, into the Nile. And to the girls, it says, the girls you should let live. In fact, it more explicitly means to make live, to follow the Egyptian lifestyle and way. So and then again in the wilderness, when the Jews were traveling, again there were more men than women, because the men were all dying each year. They would bury themselves on Tisha B'Av and then see if they woke up a few days later or not over the 40 years. So anyone who's over age 20, from the time that the spies came back with their negative report on Israel, they were all dying out. So you always had more women than men. But the Torah is emphasizing in our Parsha that the king should not have too many wives. And the joke, they say, is, when was polygamy banned? With the invention of the credit card. Okay, terrible joke. No polygamy, no chauvinistic jokes here. We're going to delete that one from our series. Okay, so we also have the laws of cities of refuge, Ari Miklat, in our Parsha. That if an accidental murder took place, this is a place where one could go for refuge. As we are now in the month of Elul, and we'll conclude the shir today with blowing a shofar, the month of Elul is like a refuge in time. So we have to remember that. It's a time to reflect and to take stock and to work on ourselves to become better. After all, if you think about what the shofar is an alarm clock. And the word shofar is also related to the word l'shafer, to beautify. So we beautify ourselves in this month by working on ourselves, by personal reflection and self-refinement. That's what it's about. We have to keep on improving. There's always room for improvement. There's always room to become better. So that's in our Parsha. And then the theme that I wanted to get to on today was where the Parsha goes into the laws of war. War is not the ideal ever. War is never the ideal, but the Torah gives us the laws of war and tells us those who are exempt from battle because they just built a home or planted a vineyard, just got married. But I want to say, when it comes to war, we're in a constant battle. Speaking of marriage, the good old joke or bad old joke, they say the 3 rings, right? The engagement ring, the wedding ring, and the suffering. Terrible joke. But in our personal lives as well, there's a constant battle between our good inclination, our evil inclination. So we have to take the lessons of war on fighting our negativity. That's why all of you notice my car, what do we have it branded as? mitzvah tank. Because instead of fighting bad wars, the enemy's within. And I was, with the kids at the bush currently. And there's a certain fear sometimes that people have inside themselves just in the bush. Maybe we're sometimes fearful of our very own, our own demons that we have to conquer. So there's an instruction, a very interesting instruction in our parsha, where the Kohen would say to the people not to fear. And that's really what I want to talk about today. So, there's more to talk about in the parsha. For example, upshernish, because in our parsha we learn it says man is like a tree of the field. So I don't know if we'll talk about that this week or not. Just thinking of things aloud. And then there's the mitzvah of egla rufa, the special procedure that was followed if a person was found dead between two cities, which we discussed previously. And of course, there's much more. But let's get focused on today's particular discussion, because let's just think about fear. Can you control your mind? Right? Can we decide how we're going to feel? Right? Are we able to choose how our mind is going to process experiences? Is that something that is even possible? Right? Are we able to choose how we experience things and what our attitude towards them should be? When we experience anything in life, whatever event, if it's good or bad, positive, negative, whether it's an interaction with another person, whatever significant life event we might be experiencing, or being impacted in whatever way, are we pre-programmed to process that event in a particular way? Think of an emotional experience. Is it how we react to things? Right? Is there some kind of instinctive way? Or do we have the ability to choose how we're going to process our life experiences? Right? What is the ideal way? What is it? How do we experience things? What is it that determines that? That's my question, my opening question for you all today. Okay? And what we'll try to explore is this mitzvah in our parsha, where during wartime,
Rabbi, the sound is gone.
Is the sound gone? Could you guys not hear me? Ladies
Now
and
we can
gents,
hear you, yeah.
what happened
Faded for a
before?
moment. I don't know.
Okay, I don't know either. Okay, please tell me if anything happens. I am out in the bush, so it's a little bit harder to control our connectivity. Okay, but thanks for telling me. So yeah, that's what I want to look at is an important aspect of Chassidus is the idea of mayach shalit alalev, to use our mind to control our emotions, and it's a very empowering concept, and it's discussed very much in Hasidic thought. And I want to discuss that with you today, how we could really control. Can we really use our mind to control our feelings, our emotions? And I was discussing this with my wife the other day. There was
Rabbi, it's
yeah.
very faint.
What's very faint?
Your voice, now it's better.
Is it now better? I don't know why. I don't know what I could do about it even. I'm not sure I don't know what we could do about that. My apologies. But if it's better now, tell me. So there's a theory, a psychology theory called now I'm forgetting what it's called. There's a name for it. Is it CBT, I think. Okay? It's cognitive behavioral therapy. And it comes back to, there was I'm almost sure he's Jewish, a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Okay, he was having doubts about the methods of psychoanalysis. You go back to Freud as an example. I'm reminded of a little story, just an anecdote that comes to mind. There was some Israeli backpackers, and they were out in the Far East. I spent a month in India, and I know many stories, and some of the rabbis out there are friends of mine. In fact, one of them unfortunately was murdered. Was a friend of mine, Rabbi Gabi Holtzberg. He was killed by terrorists in the 2008 attack in Mumbai. So I don't know if it was him or one of the other rabbis who described that he met some Israeli backpackers, and they were so fascinated by the teachings of, what do they call them out there? The Buddhism, or I don't know what they picked up in the ashram. Deep, deep thoughts. And so the rabbi, I think it could be Rabbi Holtzberg, he said to them, but we have it in our own religion as well. And in fact, our religion has the origins of these. And he shows them a sefer. He takes a book out of his library, one of the great works of Jewish mysticism, to share with one of these Israeli backpackers. And the guy gets so excited. He says, amazing, I never knew they translated the Far Eastern methodologies into Hebrew. The rabbi says, no.
Can't hear, Rabbi.
Pardon?
We can't hear you.
Is that everyone? Can nobody hear me? Can I get some clarity here? Can nobody hear me?
Can't hear you.
Nobody able to hear me. Okay, so I'm hearing that you can't, Louis Lindell can't hear me. Is anyone else struggling? Can anybody unmute themselves and tell me? Is it only Louis who can't hear me, or can nobody hear me? Ladies, gents, anyone?
Now we can hear you, but before we couldn't.
Okay, I don't know what the problem is. I'm very sorry. I am out of the bush. But if
Now
you
we
can-
can't again.
Okay. I'm going to move over a little bit, and I need you to tell me if you're still struggling to hear me. I'm going to have to cancel the shiur until I'm back. Okay, I'm going to try it this way. How about now? Could you guys hear me now?
Can hear you at the moment.
Okay.
Better.
I'm not now. I'm in the class now. Okay. Okay. As long as you can hear me, if you're struggling to hear me, please tell me, and we'll have to cancel till I'm back. Okay. The point I'm making is what the rabbi was telling this guy is, you don't have to search in other religions and philosophies to find what we have ourselves. There's a good old story that they tell about a particular Jew. And in fact, I think it's a true story. I always thought it was a fable, but I'm told there's even a shul related to this. There's a story that happened a couple of 100 years ago. This Jew is struggling to earn a living. He doesn't know what to do. He's back and forth. And he has a dream one day that under the town bridge, there's a treasure chest that's waiting for him to discover. And that will solve all of his financial worries. So he makes his way with his shovel in hand. He goes to the bridge. He starts digging. He has his equipment, and all of a sudden a police officer comes in. What are you doing? What are you digging in city property? So he says to the guy, what do you mean? I know this will sound a little bit weird to you, but I had a dream about a treasure chest buried here that's meant for me. And the officer starts laughing. He says, really? I had a dream that in the home of a certain Jew, there's a treasure chest buried in the oven, and he's describing the place, and it sounds like this guy's own house. He rushes back home, and he starts digging up his oven, and sure enough, he finds a treasure chest there. And this story, I think, was used as a metaphor many, many times about sometimes we're searching everywhere else, but the treasure is right here in ourselves. And I've heard stories of how the Dalai Lama, in fact, sent people back to Israel to study, to see what Judaism teaches. Because within Judaism, we have such great depth, and oftentimes we get lost looking elsewhere. And there was one very famous Jew who was probably the father of modern psychiatry and psychotherapy, was Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud, he dug deep into the human psyche, and what did he discover? What he called the id. The problem, we like to say, is he should have dug a little bit deeper into his own psyche, and he would have uncovered the Yid. Anyways, from Sigmund Freud's perspective, he tried to treat patients by exploring and revealing different aspects of their subconscious selves. And this other psychologist in the 50s or 60s, he was Aaron Beck, and he began working on a system that was not only more action-oriented, but also aimed at identifying the kinds of negative thoughts and attitudes that he felt, at least his patients, that he, and this is something that's why CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, became such a popular and commonly used approach, was because he felt that we needed more action, kind of, you need to do something to change. Now, what does it say in Pirkei Avot? Loi hamedrash ikar ela hamaisa. The main thing is the action, is the deed. We find a problem. What are you going to do about it? Right? We can't just be focused on the problem. That's just theory. We have to find a solution. We have to do something actively. So by adjusting the way that someone, say somebody is afflicted with depression, with anxiety, whatever other struggle people have, right? You have demons in your mind, you're thinking things that you just can't get them out of your head. So he felt that it's not just a cognitive approach that you should have. There has to be something that's more than just dealing with the troubling emotions. He felt you need to have, he called it cognitive behavioral therapy. It's about finding action, doing something. Now, I'm no expert in CBT, so don't take that from me. I'm not, but I do believe that, this is certainly a Jewish theory of changing our behavior. And if we change our behavior, we could certainly change the background, okay? Change the whatever it is that's affecting the person, okay? So it's not just psychological. It has to be concretized. It has to be, again, you'll need an expert here to use the correct terminologies and to describe the right way of articulating this. But the point I'm making is that it's not just something in the mind. It has to be something that's expressed in action. You have to change behavior in order to actually experience a change. And so in our parsha, we could find this concept. Remember, we're going back to the call when it was out, when it was a time of war, where the people were instructed not to fear. And we'll look at the verse itself in a moment. Okay? And I want to share with you a fascinating insight from our parsha that I think could really apply to our own lives as well. So let's just go back a second. Right? Let's go back to where the verse in our parsha, and we'll put it all back together. We'll try to put it into CBT, into the cognitive behavioral therapy in a moment, and we'll apply it to life as well. Okay? We'll see the Torah's therapeutic approach. Okay, so ready, set, let's go into the parsha for a moment, and let's see it here. Let's analyze it. Let's learn from it. Okay, so the Jews are getting ready to enter the land of Israel, and Moshe Rabbeinu is giving his farewell address. Remember, he is not going with them, but he says, when you get to the land of Israel, you have to conquer it. There are other inhabitants of the land, but God is giving this land to you, and not all the current inhabitants agree with God's decision, and God will be with you, and you're going to have to, there's going to be a war to conquer the land, okay? Now, there are various civil laws and guidelines for how you're going to do this, and instructions on waging the war, and all that, okay? So that's part of it, and war is not an ideal, but if we're going to have to fight, these are the laws you have to follow. So let's see it inside the verse itself. The verse starts off as follows. Kiseitze la milchama alevecha. When you go out to war, and now look at this word specifically, alevecha, on top of your enemy. You have to go with a victory mentality. You have to have the mentality for victory. You have to be upon the enemy. Am rav mimcha, and you'll see horses and chariots, people more numerous than you, right? You get scared. Says the Torah, Lo yisira mehem. Do not be afraid of them. Because Hashem, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, is with you. So do not be afraid. Okay? Do not be afraid. And this is a comment on what we're learning. Let me just check this out here. I see one of our participants on Facebook sent a comment about CBT. Okay, I'm not going to read it aloud. It seems to be a little bit more elaborate, so I won't go into it here, but I will keep note of it, and I'll get back to you later about that. Okay. So he's saying here that when you're on the way to the land of Israel, you have to be secure. You have to be confident. Don't capitulate to the fears in your heart. Okay? You have to know God's with you. So it's interesting because on the one hand, he's telling us not to be afraid. You're on the battlefield. You're waging a war. And also to remember bitachon, faith. Have faith, be strong, God's with you. Remember all the miracles God performed in the past. God's with you, God will perform them, God will take care of you. But you have to do your part. You're not going to win a lottery without buying a ticket. And you're not going to be victorious if you're not going to do your part in fighting and waging this battle. So here you have your instruction for war. Okay, and you have a leader. It was one of the Kohanim who was charged with rallying up the troops, motivating them, preparing them for this battle. And it's two messages here. There's one that's a psychological message saying, be ready, don't be afraid, be strong. And there's a spiritual message. Have bitachon, have faith, God's with you. Okay? So let's read his exact words. He says, the Kohen says to the people, what does he say to them? Let's read the words inside. He says to them, Shema Yisrael. This is his battle cry. Hear, O Israel. Now this isn't the same Shema we say every day where we're declaring our monotheistic beliefs, and belief in one God. Here he's giving them, listen up, Jewish people. Atem kravim hayom lemilchama lavechem. You're going out, you're approaching a battle against your enemies. Now remember, guys, we're not just talking about the ancient times when they were going to battle, but this is relevant to you and I as we battle against our own evil inclination. Okay? We all have our fears. We all have our daily battles. In fact, it's interesting if you think about the word warrior and warrior. So maybe we have to go from warrior to warrior, right? We should be a warrior to win the battle over our worries. The jokes that come to mind, there's two that comes to mind. I'm sorry, I have to share them with you. So one was about a fellow who was always worrying and worrying and worrying, him and his wife, always worrying about problems. Everything, what are we going to do about it? So one day he tells his wife, he says, honey, for a week I got us a present. We don't have to worry. I'm paying someone else to do the worrying for us. She says, but how are you going to pay him? He says, I told you, don't worry about it. Let him worry about it. The other joke was about a couple of fellows who used to worry so much. They used to worry all the time. So finally, they decided they're going to pay this guy to do the worrying for them. And then one turns to the other and says, but if he's getting paid so well, what's he going to have to worry about? Okay, the point is, as we read this verse, Shema Yisrael, listen. He's saying you're going out to battle against your enemies. Whether it's an actual war or our own internal war, the instruction is, Al yerach levavchem. Let your hearts not be faint. That's the important point of this verse that I wanted to focus on. And as he continues, Al tiru, you should not be afraid. The al tachbezu, and you should not be alarmed. The al tartzu mipneim, you should not be terrified because of them. Why? As the verse continues, Ki Hashem Elokeichem Hoylech Imachem. Hashem, your God, is going with you. Yes, very clearly he's telling us, on the one hand, a psychological thing, not to be worried, but at the same time, spiritually, God is with you, and God is going to fight you against your enemies, and God will save you. Not to worry at all, right? Don't you worry about a thing. That's the instruction from the Kohen. This is the battle cry to the people. Now, thank God we don't have much to worry about wars, but yet we still worry. Okay? We still worry. That's why I say, well, I don't know about you. I'm talking about me. We have worries in life. And I got to apologize. I think it looks like we have less people with us today than usual because I didn't get my WhatsApp out. I hope, I don't know if Ella Shishler managed to send a WhatsApp. My phone crashed. To tell you the truth, I've been working on myself. And in the past, I could think that I probably would have been devastated. And I am quite devastated because my phone certainly contains a lot of personal things, and my WhatsApp still won't reload. And the WhatsApps have a lot of information, and there's passwords, and there's pictures, and there's documents, and there's things on there that I don't know exactly how I'm ever going to recover them. But what can I do? What's worry going to help me? Either I'll get them back or I won't. But to worry, I don't know what is going to help. It's not, it's easier said than done. But that's what we're talking about here. We have to apply this message that the Kohen said to the people, not to worry. God's with us. So we have to, just try to picture that scene. Imagine you're out there, we ever watch these movies like, oh goodness, I can't even think of one of those, Braveheart or whatever, one of those. Imagine that Bronze Age battlefield. You have the clashing swords. You have the clanging shields, flying spears. You hear the thunderous hoofbeats. You have that scene, yes? Imagine the blood and the gore, and the battle cries, and the screams of all those people who are being murdered and dying and crying. Okay, I don't need to go into too much gory detail here. But the battlefield is not a pleasant place. It's not a rosy scene. Okay, there's war, it's bloodshed, it's terrible. There's terrifying things happening. So it would seem that here you have the commissar, the Kohen, the pre-battle pep talk to the people, telling the Jewish army not to worry. Okay? He's telling them, you don't have to worry anything. Al tiro, don't be afraid. Don't be alarmed. And you hear the soldiers thinking to themselves, don't be alarmed? It's much easier said than done. How can I not be alarmed? You see the size of the guy? Imagine you have a Goliath in front of you. Look at those people. We Jews aren't exactly, the might. I don't know, in size, where we tend to be genetically much smaller than some others out there. Right? You look at the biceps of a Goliath, you get petrified. You get scared. So what is the Kohen telling the people? What are you saying? Don't be afraid? It's a feeling. If I'm terrified, I'm terrified. Just a second. What? No, Daddy's in the middle of a share. Okay? You can say hi to everybody. You want to say hi? It's a feeling. It's an emotion. Okay? How am I supposed to deal with my feelings? If I'm scared, but he's telling us don't be afraid, how's that, how is his pep talk? How are his words really meant to motivate them? How can you not be scared in this scene? Now, you might say, maybe it's just a battle cry, and every general or whoever's paid to do this will say the same thing. But still, I'm just thinking of, for me, simple fears. Careful, Michal. Going on a roller coaster. We all have our own fears. How could you tell people just like that, calm down, relax, don't worry, it's all okay? Just doesn't seem like that the Kohen's speech, as inspiring and motivating and enthusiastic and passionate as it might be, could really change people's feelings. And besides the point, as I'm going to share with you here, some of the commentaries, some felt it was a mitzvah, some felt it was just an instruction. But either way, regardless, so I'm just picking up the text. Just see, okay, can you see? Look at Rambam here. Let's just read Rambam's words. He says, we've been warned against fearing the enemy in war, not to flee from them. It is incumbent upon us to overcome, to stand and be strong against the other nation. Anyone who retreats and flees transgresses a negative commandment. So not only that, but Rambam says that this is included in the 613 commandments here. Hashem says, you should not be terrified because of them. And repeating these words, Al Tiro, you should not be afraid. So the commandment is repeated to imply that they should not flee or escape battle, for only this way can the true faith be preserved. The laws of this mitzvah are explicated in the 8th chapter of Masechet Tractate Sota. So it seems from Rambam's words is that it's actually a mitzvah, a commandment, a biblical instruction. Moshe is telling the Jewish people a command of Hashem. That's what he was telling the people here. And again, back to my question. Can you actually have a mitzvah, a commandment, an obligation, an order that, there's absolutely no wiggle room here? Not to fear. Now we all know a basic tenet of Judaism, basic principle is that the Torah doesn't command us to do anything that we have no control of. Okay? So can we really control our emotions, our feelings? Can we really say, don't be afraid, and it's a commandment not to be afraid? From a Torah perspective, we have free will. Bechira Chavshis, we have the will to choose. It was last week's Parsha. We read, Hashem says, I place before you each day blessing and curse and life and death. So how do we tell somebody to control their feelings to this extent, not to be afraid? If God only commands us something that we're able to do, is it really a feeling that we have control over, to say that I can control my emotions, my feelings? And if we just read a little bit further, it says, Ki sishma b'kol Hashem alekecha, when you will obey Hashem your God, it's a biblical instruction that Moshe is telling the Jewish people, Shemar mitzvosav v'chukaisav haksuva b'sefer HaTorah, to observe his commandments and the statutes that are written in this Torah scroll. He's telling them very clearly, and just read his words. Ki ha-mitzvah hazos Moshe says to the Jewish people, these mitzvahs that I instruct you on this day, that I command you today, lo nifleisi micha, they are not concealed from you. V'lo rechoikahi, and it's not so distant, far away. V'lo b'shamayim, it's not in heaven that you should say, mi yala lanu hashamayim, who will go up to heaven to fetch it for us. It's not so far off. Instead, he says very clearly, what does the verse say? Ki karai ve'lecha hadavar me'oid beficha v'vavcha la'asaisa. These matters are so close to you in your mouth and your heart that you could do it. Let me ask you, is that really practical? Is this realistic? Is this something that could be expected of us? Our feelings, just a second, ladies and gents. I just got to pick up my kid here. Just a second. Say hello to everybody. Come. Say hi. Simba. Say hello. Say hi. So is this realistic to tell somebody that, and now granted they weren't kids, these were adults who went to war, but it's an instruction to each one of us not to be fearful. Is that realistic, right? How can the Torah command us and expect us not to fear the enemy? Go right out here into the Pilansberg. Try. And not be fearful of the wild. The Torah is saying, okay, maybe I'm using a wrong comparison, but the Torah is saying, do not fear the enemy. And how can the Torah dictate? How could the Torah tell us and express to us how our feelings should be? I'm sorry, guys, just a second. There you go. Go play around a little bit. Opa. There you go, Simba. So that's my question, ladies and gents, and we ain't going nowhere till we figure it out. Have you figured it out? So this is the question that I have for you right now. That here you have the pre-battle pep talk, and And it wasn't just to inspire bravery. It was actually a commandment that the Torah is giving us. Sorry, my screen is so glary, I can't even see what I have in front of me. I cannot see what you see on your screen. I hope you could see it, because I prepare myself my little notes here, and on my notes I could see what I put into the PowerPoint. But to tell you the truth, I can't see the actual screen. So I'm apologizing. I hope you could see it. I'm talking to you here with the sun. You know what I'm going to do? My apologies. I'm going to turn around, and I'm going to see if I have a better view by... Careful, Michal. Oh, thank you. Sorry, guys. Let me see if my view is any better this way. Yeah, you're not going to have the most beautiful background view, but I think I'll be able to see a little bit better like this. I hope you could see my screen better than I can. Okay. Apologies. So yeah, this was the battle cry. This was the, what do we call it? The battle cry of the Kohen before the Jews went out there into their war. And this is, of course, a message to us as well. And it's an actual instruction. It's a mitzvah. And my question to you, ladies and gents, is how can there be an instruction? How could the Torah dictate how we are meant to feel? And it's one thing to tell me how to behave. But a feeling, you can't just simply command fear away. I think CBT deals with and works on people's behaviors. But we're talking here about emotions and feelings. How do we do that? And at the end of the day, feelings, oftentimes we have different feelings and they're hard to control. If you look at the instructions of the Torah, there are various types of mitzvahs. Maybe some are harder, some are easier, right? There are some mitzvahs which seem easy to fulfill. Some are more of a tall order, right? Let's think of another one and a few other types of commandments like this. Right? For example, we say every day in Shema, you should love Hashem, your God. Sometimes it's easier to love something, to love God, or to love the stranger, to love a stranger. But what about your neighbor? What about your brother-in-law? What about people who you have a harder time getting along with? So the way the Torah puts it is very interesting. The way the verse of the Torah, the commandment, the actual instruction to love another. What does it say in the Torah? What's the actual word? Let's look at the verse itself. The Torah says, you should not take revenge or bear a grudge against the members of your people. You should love your neighbor as yourself. Now the truth is, if you look at this verse, it doesn't just say you should love your neighbor. It says, le reacha. You should have love for your neighbor, to your neighbor. Now, why specifically your neighbor? I believe you have to start with the people who live next door to you. There was a great sage, I think it was the Chafetz Chaim, but I think they tell the story today about other people as well, who said, when I was younger, I thought I could change the whole entire world. And then I've come to the realization that although that wasn't so realistically possible, so I thought at least my continent, at least my country, at least my community, then he thought at least his family. And his final conclusion was, I can't change anyone but myself. And then he realized in his old age that if he worked on changing himself, then that would have an impact and influence his family, and ultimately his community, and everyone else. He said, I wish I came to that realization earlier, that I probably would have made a much bigger difference. And this is the Chafetz Chaim, right? Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, who passed away in the 1930s at nearly 100 years old. And he made a big difference in the world. But each one of us has to take that realization ourselves too, that it all starts with ourselves. So here the Torah is telling us that we have to love every single person, but it says l'reyacha, and how kamaycha, just like yourself, and not every commandment ends with these words, Ani Hashem. Here he's saying, I am Hashem. There's many commentaries and discussions of this. I'm not going to go into all of them right now, But I think it's the same idea here, right? How could we be ordered to love another person? And kamaycha, like you love yourself. This isn't the same as keeping Shabbos. It's an instruction in the Torah, keep Shabbos, pay your workers on time, or whatever, think of all the different instructions. Love is a feeling. Either you feel it or you don't feel it. You either like chocolate or you don't. You either like the smell of coffee or you don't. Right? Either you like your neighbor or you don't like them. How could the Torah command us to love our neighbor? Love! It's a feeling. Are you really going to have that feeling? The Torah expects you to have that feeling. And of course, there are those who tell us, well, there's different commentaries on this. Let me share one with you right here. Let's just see if I can get it on the screen. Okay, this one is from Nachmanides. And he says, why does the verse say love your neighbor as yourself? And he explains it's an exaggeration. Because the heart of a person will not accept that he loves his fellow as he loves himself. And he quotes Rabbi Akiva, the great Talmudic sage, who said, when it comes to a matter, chayecha Kievman, that your life comes before the life of your fellow. So this itself is a separate instruction, and I think we once gave a share about that. I don't want to go into too much detail. But the point is, Nachmanides is telling us that you come first, right? For example, you only have enough water in the jug for yourself and somebody else. Who has to drink it? It says yourself. You go on a plane. Remember those old days when we used to actually travel once upon a time? What does the pilot announce? Or the flight attendant? What do they say? Put the mask on yourself before anyone else. And I can tell you, as a paramedic, we're told, of course, to drive safely to scenes, because otherwise we'll have another accident. Your life takes precedence in that sense. Even not only that, when we deal with patients, think about it now. During COVID and all, we put on all our PPE to protect ourselves. So your life takes precedence. So Nachmanides is telling us, you have to, it's important to love your fellow, but you come first. There are other commentaries. Let me share with you another one here. Just try to get it on the screen. Here we go. Let's read it together. Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi of Mecklenburg. He says the commentators have had difficulty with this verse. For how could the Torah command something that is contrary to nature and which no human can fulfill? To escape this quandary, he says, they have fled and fallen into deeply contrived answers. Some have said that as yourself was meant as a hyperbole and exaggeration. Some have said that it means as yourself, as you yourself benefit. That is, when you derive benefit from something, you should share with your neighbor. So if you love horses, for example, you should give one to them. In truth, however, there's no need for these exertions. The words as yourself are not problematic at all. With this expression, the Torah is simply clarifying its intention so as to say that it is only commanding that which is in accordance with nature and which anyone can fulfill, and not something that contravenes nature and which nobody can fulfill. So, obviously, we have different commentators that discuss this, but the point I'm trying to articulate is it's an emotion, it's a feeling. And it's difficult to command a feeling. And that's why some of the commentaries say that it's not necessarily realistic. Yes, the mitzvah is talking about our actions, but feelings? So I could love somebody, I could try to share with them, sharing is caring and all that. But to have feelings of love, and he expresses this a little bit further. Let me just share with you a little bit further what he says here. Love your neighbor as yourself. Says Rabbi Yaakov of Mecklenburg, what does this mean? He says that means to say every sort of favor and kindness he has assumed and decided that he deserves from his friend, he has to pay his neighbor, which is every person. That is, if Reuven wants his friend Shimon to act as a loyal friend in every way, and he thinks then in his heart about various things or ways that he expects Shimon to do for him or towards him. All of these ways that Reuven wishes for his friend Shimon to treat him. Right? The point that is being expressed here, I think, the main point that's being articulated is that nobody's actually translating this in the literal way. The Torah is commanding us to love another person. Is it really possible for us to have these feelings? Right? Could the Torah really be commanding us to control our feelings? Whether it's in this context of loving my neighbor as myself, or to fear or not to fear in battle. And I think the key to all this is, can we control our instinctive feelings, our emotions? Right? And there is something that the Torah is telling us. Indeed, you can. And what I want to share with you for the next little bit, we'll go a little bit longer, maybe 10 more minutes or so, is the Hasidic approach. I want to share with you a very interesting letter from the Tzemach Tzedek. And he explains as follows. Let's read the letter together. And this is our question. Is it realistic? Is it possible for us to control our feelings in either of these ways? Let's read it inside as this letter from the Tzemach Tzedek, where he explains this concept. And he says as follows. Every person has 3 soul garments, which are the faculties of thought, speech, and action. Okay, machshava, dibur, ma'aseh. Those are the garments of our soul. And they are the primary factors in a person's conduct. And in each of them, we have free will and the power to think, to speak, and to act as our mind wills. Even if there is fear in one's heart, it's possible to remove it. How? Through our thought, speech, and action. The key is to not think or speak about it at all, but to do the opposite. And he explains, quoting from Tanya chapter 14, do not be afraid, which is our parsha, which means to not think about the fear. Okay, here's where we get into cognitive behavioral therapy. Don't think about the fear. You're going to have to change your mindset. You're going to have to think about something else. As soon as one completely desists from said thoughts, the fear in their heart will automatically dissipate. Or at the very least, the fear will immediately become as if dormant and imperceptible to the body. And then after a few days, it will dissipate completely so that it won't enter one's mind at all, even as an intrusive thought. This is the meaning of the commandment, do not let your hearts be afraid, that we have in our parsha. So if we dig a little bit deeper into the psychological anatomy that Hasidus talks about, the garments of the soul, thought, speech, and action. It's a little bit different than Freud. We can understand the mechanics, the tools. Let's try to go a little bit deeper into this. We say that our soul is composed of various, we have our feelings, we have our emotions, we have our mind, right? And in Hasidic parlance, there's two ideas. One is called seichel, and the other is midot. Seichel is the cognitive or intellectual faculties, and midot is our emotions, our feelings, okay? Our emotional capacities. Now, generally speaking, our feelings about anything are, you have feelings. Everybody's got feelings, but we have it when we focus on a particular thing, right? So the power to focus on something, we talk about, Chabad as an acronym of Chachma Bina Dat, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. What's understanding? It's about how it filters into the way we feel about particular matters in life. Okay, our attention, that we focus on certain things. And that creates the gateway through which our emotions, our feelings about it, are connected to whatever given thing. Now, the important thing is that what we talked about, machshava dibur ma'aseh, our thought, speech, and action. Okay, so when we analyze that, we could intellectualize something, and we could have a feeling of something. Okay, So when we think about something, that's when we connect with it. And since we can control what we think about, we get to decide what we connect with intellectually and ultimately what we feel. Okay? So to emote a feeling, we have to first think about it. First comes our mind, then it goes into our feelings. Right? If you think about something else, then you won't allow the feeling to overpower. Right? Even if it remains lingering in our subconscious. Just a second, guys. Sorry, guys. So to share it with you in the thoughts of continuing here of what the Tzemach Tzedek's letter, in order to try to understand this. So Rosamund, I'm gonna let us share, please, guys. Okay. Sorry, I'm on holiday on a little bit of a site inspection, and the kids are enjoying a little bit of a break. So let's try to wrap it up. Got to share with you the thoughts. So let's read this letter together, and I'll give you my closing thoughts. He says, when one withdraws thought from something, okay, if I change my feeling. Now, of course, if I tell you don't think about a white elephant, what are you going to think about? The white elephant, right? But if I put a different thought in, then what he's saying in this letter is, then the fear will subside. The reason for this is because the intellectual and emotional attributes are sustained by das, by focus, by attention. And this, he says, is referred to in the Zohar, the 6 primary emotional attributes, because we know we have our 3 cognitive and the 7 emotional. Okay, it's hard to go into all of them because, Chassidus is deep, and I can't even tell you that I myself understand everything. I'm just sharing with you the insights that I do have. So let's just go back to our original case. We talk about a time of war. And again, don't just think about a battle, a war that with military. Think about our own personal challenges and struggles. But let's use the military analogy for now. And, fearful feelings pop into a soldier's head. You see these strong, mighty soldiers out there. You see their artillery. You see their muscles. You see all that. It's very difficult to simply wish that feeling away. Right? You can't just banish fear from the heart. But what we can do, says the Tzemach Tzedek here, is to control our thoughts, where we direct our attention. And by focusing on and thinking about something else for long enough, so changing the feelings, then we're not going to experience that fear. We're going to overpower our fear with a different feeling. We're going to have to put some positive thoughts in there. And this is what Chassidus is telling us. Mayach shalit alalev. Our mind rules over our heart. And it helps us to try to overcome our fears and whatever other feelings that we know aren't the right way, aren't the right feelings. You've heard the story before. It's actually a teaching in Hayom Yom of one of the followers of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe himself was supporting the Russians. In his time, he was a citizen of Russia, against the French. And one of his Hasidim was actually a spy for the Russians, deeply entrenched in the French military, in Napoleon's inner circle. And they accused this man of espionage. Now imagine the guy's being caught out. And the story goes that Napoleon himself said, I'll tell you if this guy is a spy. And he goes and checks the fellow's pulse. Okay, just imagine that. He's checking the guy's pulse. And he says, nah, he's not a spy. And later, he was asked how he was able to overcome this situation. He was being caught. He was busted. And he said it was this concept of Chassidus that stood me by. And he explained that my mind commanded my heart to beat not an increment faster. You think about that. This concept of Mayach Shalit El Alev was able to save his life. He had Napoleon himself checking his pulse. And he said, but I was able to control it. That wouldn't beat one increment faster. Nothing changed. And this is a concept that Chassidus teaches us, that we could use our mind to control our emotions, our feelings. Not always easy, but that's something we could try to work on, okay? The powers of thought, of focus. It's like, I guess, like any muscle we have. And the more you exercise that muscle, the stronger it's going to get. So that's something that, of course, is not something easy, but it's something that's taught in Chassidus. Let's read it in the continuation of this letter of the Tzemach Tzedek. He says, in the main, the diversion of dat. Dat, again, is implementation. It's part of the name, the acronym of Chabad. And of one's thought is achieved by guarding one's thoughts and by investing them elsewhere. Again, I'll tell you from personal experience, this isn't an easy concept to implement. But he says you could apply this to anything. Whatever it might be. This can even be in worldly matters. If they are pressing or positive, of course, in our spiritual, in God's Torah, which gladdens the heart. And each and every day, by setting fixed times for Torah study, which we're doing right now, when you study Torah, your mind is engaged in the spiritual pursuit of connecting with Hashem. And then, of course, we could overcome whatever external, whatever superficial challenges and struggles we face. So, of course, this is a very spiritual approach to dealing with life's problems, telling us that by directing our thoughts to control our emotions, but the Tzemach Tzedek doesn't end here. It goes a little bit further. Let's read it. Obviously, we could say that, yes, we can do things that, actively directing our thoughts in the positive direction, and that's certainly very powerful, and certainly something we could try to do, right? The power of thought. We should strengthen this muscle, not just our biceps and triceps, but this muscle, our thought. But it goes a little bit deeper than that as well. And of course, my friends, when you study Chassidus, and not just a taste of it as I try to give you here, but when you go deeper into it yourself, you get a much deeper understanding. Let's continue with the letter of the Tzemach Tzedek. And with this, I think we'll get some real direction and instruction for life. He says, what's more, a person ought to be very careful not to speak of any melancholy matters. Don't get dragged down into negativity. To the contrary, one ought to exhibit joyous mannerisms, as though his heart was filled with happiness, even if at the time his heart is not, it eventually will be. You think right now I'm bogged down by things that are depressing. Whatever it might be, a person sometimes is going through a depressing situation in life. Try to focus on something more positive. Try to find something more positive to focus on. The reason for this is that the deeds and the activities a person performs subsequently become fixed in his heart. This is cognitive behavioral therapy. Can we change our emotions? And therefore he says, quoting Rambam, a person should do once, twice, a third time. Get involved in actions. Distract yourself from whatever is the negative emotion and feeling, and this will put you in the right direction. So when you're feeling sad, what happens? We get sluggish. We get feeling lethargic. We feel down in the dumps, right? We just don't feel in a good place. But what if I put myself into a more positive situation? In fact, the story that Tzemach Tzedek that comes to mind, when the Alter Rebbe was very ill. In fact, he passed away in the early 1813. They were escaping from Napoleon. Napoleon was after him. The French troops were pursuing him. And unfortunately, it was Friday night. It was the last day the Alter Rebbe was alive in this world, because his life was endangered. And here the Tzemach Tzedek, his grandson, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Lubavitch, was leading the prayers that night. And you can imagine his grandfather's not well. They're followed by, they're accompanied by Chassidim and followers and family. And so when he was singing Lechadodi, which I usually try to use a very joyous tune for our Lechadodi, he couldn't. He was using a very sad tune. And the Alter Rebbe himself was gravely ill and passed away a few hours later. Turned to his grandson and said, Shabbos were meant to be joyous and happy. Don't turn Shabbos into a sad time. Don't sing in a melancholy, morose tune. We can't be in this lugubrious state. Right? And he told his grandson, cheer up. His message was that if you act in a cheerful way, then you'll be happier. Of course, how can he be happy? His grandfather's dying. But his grandfather himself said, be happy. And the story goes about his own, was it his father-in-law, the Mittler Rebbe? He passed away on a joyous Hasidic holiday. And he gave his instruction, even though he was dying, he gave instruction to the Hasidim to be happy. And at his funeral, they sang a song. The Rebbe geheißen Freilach sein, Freilach sein, Freilach soll men sein. The Rebbe said to be happy. They couldn't be happy. They're going to his funeral. He passed away. But the point the Rebbe was instructing them was that if you get into the right frame of mind, which of course requires that mayach shalitalib, use your mind to control your emotions. If you want to be happy, start singing, dancing. Don't sing a sad tune for the chadadi. Next time you're feeling down, right? Try to do something that will put you into a joyous state. That's why I always say, lift someone else up and you yourself will be uplifted. That's the way I feel about it. So, think about, here's a good example that comes to mind. I, before moving to South Africa, always drove in a car, automatic. I never knew this trick because I don't think you could do this with an automatic. But in a manual car, with an automatic car, the normal way of starting up the car, right? We put the key in the ignition, and that's it, right? That's the healthy approach. But when the car breaks down,
Dad,
just a second, guys. Yeah.
I have a cake now.
Ask mommy.
And she said yes.
So then ask mommy for it.
I
Okay.
did. I did.
Okay, not right now. Mwah. So
But I had
what's the way we fix our car?
Dad, but I had breakfast.
Okay. What I discovered here in South Africa, where I started driving a manual, was that when the car breaks down, you don't have to just put the key in the ignition. There's another way to get it started, right? The non-normal way. There's another way to do it.
The black phone that Mendel's holding.
Yeah, you could.
No.
I don't know. Ask Mendel if he gives you a turn, because tell him sharing is caring is what we're learning in the shir. What's the other way of doing it? The other way is you get the car, I think you put it into second gear. Yeah? And even though the battery doesn't have enough juice to get started, but if you push the car, right, you get it into a hill, and the wheels gain enough momentum, then you can force the engine to start. It's a different approach. So what happens is, this is the Hasidic approach, that maybe I'm not in the mood, but I put myself in the mood. I sing. I uplift someone else even though I'm down. And I myself will automatically be uplifted as well. It's a form of therapy. Act happy. Do happy things. Do good things. And I'll become happier, even though I'm not happy. Right? Even if mentally or emotionally I'm not there. But by putting myself into this situation, it will uplift me as well. So that's the idea. And I think hopefully we can understand how it's possible to avoid feeling afraid during war, which was the question that we were addressing today. Obviously, fear is, the instinctive way that I'm feeling right now. It's the natural response to war. That's the way I feel. I'm feeling fearful. How could you tell somebody to change their feelings? Just a second. What are you doing? Okay, but you see right now I'm a little share, so wait till I'm done. And then, okay? Think. So if I'm struggling with how, with the situation, I'm not feeling confident in this battle. And we all have our own battles, right? So let's not start with just, okay, I'm going to change my feelings. How do we build the confidence? And you think about how soldiers march. See how they stand tall. They put out, what do they say? Stomach in, chest out. You walk in a confident way. And the same is true when it comes to whatever challenges, whatever we're dealing with, in our spiritual journey as well. Try to focus. Make a mental list of things that will uplift us. We talk about the mitzvah to love our neighbor as ourselves. Think about the person we're struggling to get along with. Try to think of the good qualities. Put into perspective their positive traits. Maybe the challenges that they face. And we might have to force ourselves even to come up with something. But if we could flood our minds with positive thoughts about that person, then it will eventually lead us to actually loving that person. That's how we could have that idea of love your neighbor as yourself. If we struggle, of course, with the originally we should try to begin with to love another person. But if you're struggling that, then you can force that feeling. And I think that's another approach that we have to try to apply in our lives. So we're going to conclude here with one or two more insights. And this is the idea, the mitzvah of loving your fellow. The original is just do it. If you can't, right? If a person you don't see easily the positive qualities in another, then let's realize that we have to maybe dig a little bit deeper. And if we dig deep enough, we're going to find the positive in another as well. So if we focus our mind, put our mind into focusing and thinking about the positive qualities of another. Put something positive into whatever situation we find. It's mental self-control. And the first step to mind mastery is being aware of how much our mind wanders on its own. Right? So we have to try to thinking about something, try to focus on a topic for 30 seconds. See how quickly we go off, our mind veers off. And then what I want us to try to do is to exert some control over the direction of our train of thought. Right? When you notice an unwanted thought coming our way, see if we can immediately change the topic to something positive. Right? Can't find something positive, at least something natural. Do something that will stimulate us to be in the positive direction. And the final point is, if we can learn how to focus on a particular thought, even when our mind does wander off, inevitably that's going to happen because I talk for myself as an ADD, we wander off. It's the way we do things. But try to immediately refocus our attention and put it into the right direction. Think of the mind as a muscle, as we said. Any muscle has to be regularly exercised if we want to get good use of it. If I want my muscles to be strong, I'm going to have to exercise them. And the same is true, of course, with our mental muscles. That's what we have to do. But if we ever find that these mental moves are not working, then the best thing to do is to just get moving. To physically move about, to launch into exercise. It's a great thing to do. Just go out there and exercise. Whatever else works for you. All you have to do is reset our mood. To act the way we want to feel. As they say, fake it till you make it. And ultimately, we'll take back control of our mind. So with that in mind, that's exactly what I'm going to do now with my kids, because I think they're calling my attention over and over. So it's time to do that with them. But before we go, let's take a moment to blow the shofar for you right here in the wild. And with this, we'll conclude today's shir. All right, ladies and gents, are we ready?
Yeah.
Ladies and gents, that concludes today's sheer discussion. Any questions before we go?
I'm sorry, Rabbi. I don't want to keep you from your children. Shkaf, that was wonderful. Yet this Torah is sympathetic to those who cannot go into war because there are conditions that exempt people from going to war.
Yes, absolutely. There are certain instances where it's just
Yeah.
impossible, or I shouldn't say impossible. Nothing's impossible. The very word impossible spells I impossible, right? So perhaps
just-
the idea. So perhaps the idea then is that in those situations where a person needs more work to work on themselves, in those instances, the Torah says, okay, you need some more time. Fine, take your time. You'll get there. But in the meantime, you can't go to war. Of course, a newlywed couple, someone who's recently married doesn't go to war, and there are many instances where one doesn't go to war. It's not a good idea for a newly married couple to be fighting, right? Anyways, yes, absolutely. It's a good point, Rosalind. Certainly, the Torah understands that God's compassionate, and no doubt that there are certain instances where one can't control for now. They'll have to work on it, and during that time, they mustn't go to war. Winston, you're asking, is there a blessing before blowing the shofar? Yes, but right now it's practice. Right now it's an alarm clock. The actual shofar blowing as a mitzvah will be on Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah, we will not be having our shiurim because obviously we'll be in shul and we don't use technology on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So on Yom Tov, we're gonna actually say the bracha for blowing and hearing the shofar. Any questions before we go?
A wonderful
Rabbi,
time, Rabbi.
Thank you. We'll see you,
Rabbi,
please God, tomorrow. I'm not sure yet where we'll be, but we'll please God continue. And
Someone else has.
there was something before we said we want to talk about. Maybe we'll talk about the difference between the difference between the sages' laws versus sages versus scripture. Maybe we could do that. Look at that tomorrow as we were looking at the parsha today. It certainly was a topic that stood out to me. So if I have some time to prepare something on that, we'll try to do that.
Rabbi, Ezra, as a comment.
Yes, Ezra. Pardon?
Yes. My comment is that by any chance, can you probably prepare some times to come in terms of the discussion around the mind, because I've seen
Around what?
people around the power of the mind.
Of the mind. Yeah, that's sort of what we discussed today. Look, tomorrow, what I'm hoping to do, again, I can't promise, and I don't have, my phone's broken, so I can't even communicate with you guys properly. Tomorrow, hopefully, we'll look at, this aspect. We'll apply the mind as well. Anything in particular about the mind? I mean, my thought was just about how sages, the difference between the sages, the rabbis versus the Torah. But what did you have in mind? And I'll see if I could stick that in.
Yeah, because once the mind, everything collapses, the body just goes away.
Okay, well, we'll see where we could. Certainly, if you use today's concept, it's about using our mind to control our feelings. But let's see. We'll see what tomorrow brings. Okay.
Okay.
For now, Zeitgesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Cheers. See you tomorrow, please God.